Can there be anything better on a Sunday evening at church than to hear a story of treachery, murder, cursing, jealousy, all of these? The soap opera of Abimelech. Yes. Well, that's what we have before us tonight on the pages of Scripture. All that. And it's this way, of course, because this is what Gideon's legacies left the people of Israel and us. His death gave way to a civil war of sorts. His 70 heirs, remember, have been reduced to a single son, hiding for his life in wells. And Abimelech, the son of a slave wife, is attempting to rule Israel as a king. Oh, Abimelech, remember, he's a very ungodly man, not a judge, much less a king. And he's determined to hold on to power through any means necessary. But like any tyrant, he has his enemies, which we're going to see this evening. We're going to start in Judges 9:22. We've got a lot of reading tonight, so we'll read on down to 33. Judges 9:22 through 33. Now Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. So the violence done to the 70 and their blood might be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his. The men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who might pass by them along the road. And it was told to Abimelech, now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his relatives and crossed over into Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their trust in him. They went out into the field and gathered the grapes of their vineyards and trod them, and they held a festival. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is Zebul not his lieutenant? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? Would therefore that this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. When Zebul, the leader of the city, heard the words of Gaal to the son of Ebed, his anger burned. He sent messengers to Abimelech deceitfully, saying, behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem. And behold, they are stirring up the city against you. Now therefore arise by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And behold, when he and the people who are with him came out, you shall do to them whatever you can. So Abimelech settles into a limited form of rule years. He rules a limited section of Canaan in and around Shechem. To everyone that this man isn't going to rise to significant power. He's not going to be that big of a wheel. Instead of a vast empire, this man has only managed to become a ruler over a city and some of the surrounding countryside there. Abimelech resides in Arumah, as we'll see a little later, and his vassals are required to send, and he uses this power to rob the people of their wealth. So naturally, this treatment breeds resentment with the people. Ironically, they wanted Abimelech as king because they were afraid of bad treatment at the hands of Gideon's sons. And yet, after only 3 years, they have exactly the situation that they were trying to avoid. Right? Because they selected an evil man contrary to the Lord's will, remember? So more importantly, the Lord himself takes steps to ensure that this false leader can't remain in power for very long. As we saw last spirit to stir up discontent between Abimelech and those that he rules. And this discontentment boils over into civil war until the sons of Abimelech come back to rest on his own head as the terrible things he did to Gideon's sons are done to him. So it starts with the men of Shechem sitting in ambush for those who travel down the road leading into this city. Now there's a road that passes between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal on its way into the city. And anyone coming into Shechem would have to travel through this pass, making them vulnerable from ambush from above. Abimelech required that the surrounding villages under his control pay him tributes and taxes. And these payments came by way of this road. So when the men of the city decide they've had enough of this man's rule, they take it upon themselves to steal from his tributes. They ambush travelers taking the possessions like in a highway robbery. And eventually the news reaches Abimelech here that his tribute is being taken. And more importantly, that his authority is being challenged. For Abimelech, another man arrives on the scene to challenge his authority. That man is named Gal, a Canaanite who was opposed to Yahweh and anyone who was associated with the Lord. So Abimelech, since he was the son of Gideon, and he decides to enter Shechem and wins over some of the men of the city against Abimelech. Now to cement their new alliance, what do? They take grapes from the fields belonging to Abimelech, and they go and make some wine and have a little festival here. Now, this was a worship act intended to formalize a relationship and establish a new god over them. Then they cursed Abimelech, which means they entered into a conspiracy against him. In the course of that feast, what Gal do? He declares who is this man Abimelech that the city should serve him. Now he's enemy, but instead the city ought to surround the city. Remember? And in a phrase similar to the one Abimelech said himself, or used to justify his reign, remember? Gael said, wouldn't Gael, however you pronounce it, Gael or Gael, said that, wouldn't it be better to be ruled by me? Remember when Abimelech said that? And Gael issues a challenge and defend himself in battle. Now, Gael said this knowing that Abimelech had his spies in the city who would report back exactly everything that he said. The ruler of the city, Zebul, Abimelech's lieutenant, he hears these boasts and he goes into a rage. And he sends messengers to Abimelech and informs the would-be king that Gael, and he calls upon Abimelech to come back by night when he can attack Gael at dawn in the city. So we're going to pick it up in verse 34 and read a little farther down here. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate. And Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from the ambush. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." But Zebul said to him, "You are seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were men." Gaal spoke again and said, "Behold, people are coming down from the highest part of the land and of the diviner's oak." Then Zebul said to him, "Where is your boasting now, with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?' Is this not the people whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them." So Gaal went out before the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Abimelech remained at Arumah, but Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not remain in Shechem. Now it came about the next day that the people went out to the field, and it was told to Abimelech, and divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. When he looked and saw that the people coming out from the city, he arose against them and slew them. Then Abimelech and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate. The other 2 companies then dashed against all who were in the field and slew them. Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he captured the city and killed the people who were in it. Then he razed the city and sowed it with salt. He was busy that day. So Abimelech here executes the plan of Zebul. He comes to the fields near Shechem. Then in the early morning light, Gaal goes to the city gate to watch for an expected attack. Looking up from the fields and hillsides surrounding the city, he realizes he's under attack now. His plan must have been to remain in the city walls and defend the city from attack. But Zebul, realizing that Gaal wasn't so easily fooled, tries to convince the man that this isn't an attack at all. He comes up with this feeble explanation that these were just shadows in the early light. Gaal, he wasn't fooled, you noticed. And he sees that Abimelech's army has been divided into camps that approach from various directions. That his deception isn't working, Zebul comes clean in verse 38, telling Gael that be a man and fight. Right? This is the battle that you asked. 39, Gael led the leaders of the city into battle against Abimelech. Now the city leaders have aligned with Gael. So everyone knows this is a battle to the death for either side. Nobody's going to come out of this alive on one side or the other. In this battle here, Abimelech's forces are victorious in killing the soldiers who come out from the city for battle. But the city itself is still defended behind its walls. So while Abimelech's forces have succeeded in defeating Gael's forces, Zebul begins to fight within the city against those who rebelled against Abimelech. In verse 42, we're told that Zebul drives Gael and his forces out of the city. And Abimelech is told that his enemies have been driven out of the city and are vulnerable outside of the city. So he takes his army back to Shechem and splits his army into 3 different companies. One company had the task of guarding the entrance of the gate of the city, so it couldn't be retaken or closed. This ensured that Abimelech's army, the rest of his army, defeated the people of the city who were in the field. And then they fought in this city until they had defeated the entire city in retribution for giving safe harbor to Abimelech's enemy. I know this is a lot of history, but it's all important. So to make sure the city would never oppose him again, Abimelech salted the earth. Now, he probably didn't apply salt to the whole area, just a portion. But in any case, this was a symbolic act that indicating the city would never rise again to challenge. The city's done. It's never going to rise again. Rebellion isn't over yet. Let's pick it back up in verse 46. When all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem heard it, they entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. The Tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees, and lifted it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise." All the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech, and put them on the inner chamber, and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the men of the Tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. Yeah, ooh. So after the destruction of Shechem here, Abimelech learns that some of the city's inhabitants had escaped and were held up in that nearby military fortress. So Abimelech's not satisfied that anybody survived this retribution. He calls upon those in his army to each cut down a limb from a tree. And when the crowd piled the wood up at the base of the tower where the people were held up, and they proceeded to burn the wood and killed everybody through smoke and burning. Not a good way to go. And 1,000 men and women died in the fire. Now at this point, I think he's operating under pure rage and bloodlust at this time. He's not content with just simply destroying the city. He now attacks a nearby city, as you read, probably out of suspicion they too are aligned against him. That picks up in verse 50. It says, then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the center of the city. Women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shut themselves in. You wouldn't think this is a very good idea, shutting yourselves in these towers. And they went up in the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. Yay. He called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, so that it will not be said of me, a woman slew him. So the young man pierced him through, and he died. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each departed to his home. Thus God repaid the wickedness done to his father in killing his 70 brothers. Also God returned all the wickedness of the men of Shechem on their heads, and the curse of Jotham the son of Jerubbaal came upon them. Half-brother, yeah. Abimelech was from the slave woman, and then the 70 brothers were of the free women. So those were actually, yeah. all from different women. So Thebez here, Tubas, which is northeast of Shechem. And we have no reason in Scripture for this attack, which is why I kind of suppose he's operating from pure rage at this point. Now, the city had a strong tower in the center of it where the people retreated for safety. But Abimelech intends to siege his tower too. He gets very far with his plan. A woman throws a large millstone down on his head. Now, we're not talking about the millstones that, the horses and donkeys used to drag around. Women had them in their house that they used to be able to grind grain with also. So anybody could have picked them up. Suppose that the stone knocked him unconscious at first, at least at first. Whatever the initial result, the impact damaged his head to a point that he expected to die in the end. He thought, this is it. But rather than die from the injury, what's he say? He asked for a member of his own army to kill him. Remember we said in the story back in Deborah that it was a dishonor for a soldier or a young boy, yes. So Abimelech wants to avoid this outcome. I mean, God forbid, 1,000 years later, they know that a woman killed him, which we do anyway. So after Abimelech dies, the men of his army lose all interest. I think that's neat too. He dies and they all just go home. In verse 56, this is how the Lord repaid this man for his wickedness to Gideon's family. They didn't have much heart for it. So we are to understand that all this transpired happened under God's hand. He sent the evil spirit, remember? We talked about that. He orchestrated certain events and outcomes. All this so Abimelech would know the full outcome of his own treachery. To include ensuring Abimelech's death would dishonor him in the eyes of the people. Samuel says here that the men of Shechem likewise experienced judgment for the wickedness they displayed in working with Abimelech against Gideon's family. So notice Samuel also adds that these things happened because of the prophetic curse spoken by Gideon's. We can only marvel at the power of God to turn people and events precisely so that they accomplish all of his desires. Notice that Abimelech was able to defeat the city of Shechem, which appeared to be a victory for the bad guys, except simply use Abimelech to punish the men of Shechem for killing Gideon's son, or his sons. And then once the people of Shechem had paid the price, the Lord turned his attention back to Abimelech. And the Lord uses a woman in a tower to kill him. No army was even necessary. Does this story broaden your understanding of how the Lord works to accomplish his will? He allows Abimelech to rise to power as a means of demonstrating the evil in the people's hearts. He allows Abimelech to kill Gideon's sons to illustrate how Gideon keep slave wives and to produce sons were in error. The Lord spares one son so that son can be used by God to pronounce a curse on the leader. The king to rule harshly over the people for 3 years, demonstrate the foolishness of their desires. It was a life of privilege again. Also, the man had 30 sons, which I would assume he had multiple wives, because I don't think one woman would have done this, but maybe. But he had multiple sons just like Gideon did. And it would seem that Samuel kind of elected not to say much more about these two men because the main point is obvious. We can see Israel's tendency again here to return to the same sins again and again. And even though a judge has ruled them without incident for 23 years, that didn't stop the decline of the people again. Because of the excesses of Jair, the people are set up for a new round of sin. It's more punishment. Let's read verses 6 through 9 here. It says, Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, hands of the Philistines, and into the hands of the sons of Ammon. They afflicted and crushed the sons of Israel that year. For 18 years they afflicted all the sons of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in Gilead and the land of the Ammonites. The sons of Ammon crossed the Jordan to fight it also against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was greatly distressed. Once more, idolatry enters into a daily practice among the people. They turned away from the Lord as if he was just another pagan god that could be traded for any other. And the Lord, he did as he has to, right? He did as he must. He disciplined the people with oppressors from both the east and the west. And for 18 years, the people were afflicted by their own sins. That's the way we must view the Lord's like a vice. You kind of squeeze the people. But the people themselves were the ones turning the screws by sinning against the Lord, by sinning against his word. Until they're greatly distressed again, it says there at the end. So I'm speeding through this story because you've heard it before, and Samuel, he knows it. There's no reason to dwell on the details here beyond what's obvious. Fallen hearts are wandering hearts. Sinful people seek for sinful relationships, beginning with the desire to forsake the Lord for earthly attachments. Israel is doing it once more here. And it started after the leader charted the course of sin in his own excesses and abuses. Now, leaders are not the cause for our sin, right? But sinful leaders among God's people are a cancer for godliness. You can see that today. There's no godliness in our government. And if we persist in these sins, repeat these cycles in our own walk, we dare the Lord to respond ourselves. As we learn in Hebrews, the Lord may stop rescuing us someday. He may decide to leave us in our sin. I even prayed tonight about our lives becoming a testimony for the world. It could be a negative testimony to the world.